Well, let's stay on this topic right now and bring in Arthur Wilczynski. He is the Senior Fellow with the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. He spent more than 30 years in the Canadian Public Service working on foreign policy, intelligence, and security issues. Arthur, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here we have Zhao Wei now being declared persona non grata by the Canadian government. This was after a week of heavy pushing from the opposition, in particular Conservative members. Did it take this government too long to come to that conclusion?
I think it did, but I'm glad that it's an important step that they have taken. I think it was the very least that the government could do in terms of conveying to the government of the People's Republic of China and to Canadians that the behavior of foreign interference, in particular the threatening behavior undertaken by this individual, is unacceptable. And it's a very calibrated response, but it's also a fairly limited and circumscribed response.
Yeah, limited, as you say, but why limited, though? Because, yes, Zhao Wei was involved in this intimidation tactic, and make no mistake, that's what this was, in trying to intimidate a member of parliament. But at the same time, this is on top of foreign interference in 2 federal elections at least, Chinese police stations, so-called police stations in this country intimidating the Chinese diaspora who are now part of this country. Why does it have to be limited?
Well, I don't think it needs to be. I think that's a judgment call. And I think that the government and the minister over the past number of days have been signaling that they wanted to send a message, but they were also concerned about a number of factors. Their concerns, I think, are legitimate in terms of what will be the response of the People's Republic of China. Historically, that government does take disproportionate action, and it can affect our consular affairs, it can affect economic interests. But again, that's why I'm glad that this is a first step, and I agree that it's limited. All of the things that the PRC has been doing in Canada over the past number of years have been completely unacceptable. The fact that they've been doing it with impunity, the fact that they've been doing it in multiple places across the country, where, like you said, the reports of the police stations in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, this is something that's widespread. And I think that a more robust response would have been appropriate. But again, I think that I prefer a response than no response.
I do wonder, though, what is the concern, though? You say you believe that the government hesitation on some fronts is legitimate. Walk us through that, because I think there are a lot of Canadians that don't understand. They look at this and say, clearly, these Chinese diplomats, or this one Chinese diplomat at least, was trying to intimidate a member of parliament, which has an impact on our democracy.
Right.
You're trying to influence the Chinese diaspora in this country, which has an impact on our democracy. So what is the fear of basically saying to China, no?
So the fear is that they'll take action in various areas unrelated to the specificity of what they're accused of doing here. And that cuts across a wide swath of potential activities. So again, Canada has a diplomatic presence and a consular presence in the PRC. We have a presence in Hong Kong. And the concern is that if we kick out one, they'll kick out many. And that our ability to serve the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who live in either Hong Kong or the PRC will not have access to the kinds of services that they need in order to maintain their well-being in terms of maintaining connections to Canada. So that's a legitimate concern. My experience has been, and I'll draw on the time when I served in Norway as Canada's ambassador there. When I was there, the Norwegian government was in a very significant spat with the PRC, and that was over the awarding of a Nobel Prize to a Chinese dissident. And China took broad action against Norway. It tried to make an example out of Norway because it was so displeased with the actions of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. And so I think it's legitimate to expect that China will undertake the same kind of broad-based action against Canada. So we need to be measured. We need to understand the implications. And I think that that's why, over the past number of days, Minister Joly and the Prime Minister have been saying that our response is going to be, measured. We'll communicate it appropriately to the representatives of the PRC. It's why the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs had called in the Chinese ambassador. I think all of this was laying the groundwork over a number of days through very strong diplomatic language that something was going to happen. So it wouldn't surprise the PRC. We'll now see whether or not the PRC will reciprocate or aggravate the situation. But again, as you said, I think that this is literally the least that the government can do, and I would have hoped that they would have been more robust in their response.
Now, Michael Chong, of course, the Conservative MP at the center of this most recent episode, he stood up in the House of Commons today and accused the government of failing to protect members of Parliament, failing to protect the democratic process in this country. What do you say to that?
I say that he's correct to be angry. I say that he has, and Canadians have, every right to expect that the government is going to protect them and their national interests. And I think that it's taken too long for the government to take this small step. I think that we've been hearing from everyone from the Prime Minister, Minister of Public Safety, various national security and intelligence officials for months now that China is the #1 foreign interference threat to Canadians. We have heard from members of the Chinese diaspora directly about the effect that this is having on their sense of security and their sense of well-being, the harassment, the intimidation. It's unacceptable that this kind of behavior happen in the country, and that we need to send a strong message. And the conversation around we were worried about the consequences, I think ignored the fact that Canadians are already suffering the effects of the foreign interference. We're not starting from zero, and that the initial action is this expulsion of a Chinese diplomat. Canadians for years have been feeling the effects of this foreign interference and harassment of the Canadian diaspora, and they've been feeling that without consequences for the representatives of the government, the PRC government that is undertaking this. And that's unacceptable. We have to show that we will not tolerate this kind of action for the benefit of Canadians who are suffering and who are the victims of this action, but we also need to send strong action to other hostile state actors who are looking at what Canada is doing and are coming to the conclusion that this is a permissive environment, that they can interfere with diaspora communities here, they can harass and intimidate, and that the Canadian government will be reticent to take action. And that is a terrible message to send both to Canadians and to those hostile actors that are willing to intimidate us on our sovereign territory.
Archel Wilczynski, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.